Every trucker who drives around Arizona at night has heard of him. Some call him the man in the sedan, others call him the car without a soul. To me, he's the guy with no license plate. A black sedan, always clean, without a scratch, that appears in the rearview mirror when you least expect it. The first time I saw him was on I-10, near Benson. I was on a flat stretch of road, with no curves, no other vehicles in front or behind. It was fine. Until I saw his headlights behind me. Low, but bright. But it didn't make sense for him to be there. I had left a convoy behind about 40 minutes ago, and I hadn't seen anyone overtaking or approaching. It appeared out of nowhere. I thought it was a civilian car in a hurry, so I signaled and moved to the right to let it pass. But it didn't pass. It stayed there, at the same distance. Exactly. As if it was studying me. After about 10 minutes, I started to find it strange. I looked again and noticed that the car had no license plate. Neither the back nor the front. No identification marks. Just the black sedan, with tinted windows. I accelerated. I went up to almost 80 miles. I couldn't pass. He was tailgating. I slowed down again. So was he. I started to get irritated and decided to throw the truck on my shoulder to force the pass. With the hazard lights on, I pulled the truck over to the shoulder and looked in the rearview mirror. The car was coming, and then it disappeared. It didn't turn, it didn't stop, it didn't brake. It just disappeared. As if it had never existed. I stood there for a long time, trying to understand. I got up from the cab and walked to the road. Nothing. No sign of a tire. No lights. I thought about cameras. I thought it could have been some regular car, or a guy messing around. But at the next stop, when I mentioned it to another trucker at the gas station, he turned pale. He asked, was it a black sedan with no license plate? I just nodded. And he said, man. He followed me last year for almost an hour. And when I stopped, he was in the mirror. A second later, he was gone. Since then, I've heard more and more people telling similar stories. All with the same car. All with the same detail, he never overtakes. After that day, I started paying attention to everything when I drive at night in Arizona. Especially when I'm alone on the highway. And boy, did it take long. About 10 days later, between Casa Grande and Tucson, he showed up again. Same old thing. Out of nowhere. I glanced in the rearview mirror, blank. A quick blink of my eyes, and there were the low beams, glued to the back. No other cars around. This time, I swear I saw someone inside. A figure in the driver's seat, motionless. I couldn't see a face, just the shape, like a wax figure sitting down. I did what anyone would do, I turned on the CB radio and tried to call someone. Nothing. The frequency was clear. I even left the channel open to see if I could pick up a signal from a gas station or patrol car. And what happened? Interference. But only while the car was behind. A heavy, pulsating hiss, as if the radio was picking up the sound of an engine, without an engine. And then I noticed a pattern. Every time he appeared, the speedometer would freeze. The internal light on the dashboard would blink slowly. As if his presence messed up the electrical system. I decided to test it out. I took a random exit, one of those small roads that cut through the desert. He kept following me. The road was full of potholes and uneven, and yet he moved as if he were floating. Without shaking, without bouncing, glued to me. At a certain point, I turned again, cutting north, and he kept going. That's when I realized, it didn't matter which direction. He wasn't following the road. He was following the truck. As if he were tied to me. And then, for the first time, I saw what was inside the car. In the side mirror. The moonlight helped. The front window reflected quickly. The guy had no face. The space where his face should have been was smooth. Smooth as old leather. Just the shape of his head and nothing else. I almost lost control of the truck. I got back onto the main lane as fast as I could. And again, when I waited to pass, he was gone. No sound. No sign of dust. The road went back to normal. As if he only existed under certain conditions. Or as if he was waiting for me to make a mistake. I was obsessed for a while. I started writing down the times, the weather, the exact route. And I realized that it only appears between 2 and 4 in the morning. Always in places where there are no city lights. And always when I'm alone. There's a part near Wilcox where, every time I pass by, I feel like it's going to come back. And sometimes it does. I've already stopped trying to film or take pictures. My phone freezes, the image comes out black. And the sound never records. There's just that low hiss, like something spinning near the microphone. One night, I tried to face it. I kept the course, high beams on, held the steering wheel firmly and stared in the rearview mirror. He appeared again. But this time, I turned the rearview mirror and he wasn't behind me. I looked in the side mirror and there he was, right next to me. The black car. Window open. And I saw the passenger seat. There was someone there too. A woman. Pale, with her eyes wide open. Staring at me. As if she wanted to get inside the cabin. I braked. I didn't accelerate, I didn't stop. I just kept going. After that, I was never the same. Every time I see a headlight behind me at night, my heart races. Even if it's just an ordinary car. Even if it has a license plate. Because the truth is, you never know if it's him. I've heard stories of truck drivers who disappeared on the stretch between Phoenix and Lordsburg. People who disappeared without a trace. Some swear he appears before these things happen. As if he were a warning. Or an invitation. So if you're driving through Arizona in the middle of the night and you see a black sedan approaching, do not attempt to overtake. Do not stop on the shoulder. I threw the truck over my shoulder to let him pass. But he disappeared, without braking. It was on the stretch between Gallup and Flagstaff that I started to notice it. An empty stretch of I-40, a long, straight road, with no living souls for miles. I was heading to California, simple transportation, light cargo. It was around 3 a.m., and the CB radio was dead. No wind, no music, just the sound of the road. And suddenly, amid the roar of the engine and the soft hum of the air, I heard breathing. Very close. I thought it was the echo of the engine, or my own breath bouncing off the windshield. Until I realized it was coming from the steering wheel. I stopped for a moment, without turning off the truck. I pulled over and listened. And man, it was very clear. A rhythmic, heavy breathing, like someone exhausted. But the sound wasn't coming from inside the cabin, nor from the dashboard. It was coming from the steering wheel. I put my ear to it on impulse, and almost dropped everything in shock. It was as if someone was on the other side of the leather, sighing. A damp, muffled sound, with irregular pauses. As if the person there was struggling to stay awake. I tried to find some logical explanation. Engine vibration? Air leak? Nothing. The sound was too organic. I turned everything off. Engine, ventilation, headlights. Everything. And the breathing continued. There. In the most absolute silence, with the desert all around, I could hear someone breathing on the steering wheel of my truck. I turned everything back on in desperation and continued on my way. But the sound didn't stop. And the worst part, every time my hands touched the steering wheel, I felt a strange heat. As if the leather had a human temperature. After a while, I started to notice another detail. The leather on the steering wheel seemed to be slightly deformed. As if someone inside was pressing lightly, very lightly, trying to get it out. A small swelling, then it would come back. It would repeat itself. Almost like the movement of a chest breathing. I tried to record it with my cell phone. The camera only picked up the ambient sound, but the recording was flawed. As if something was interfering. When I tried to transfer the video to my computer later, the file was corrupted. But I know what I heard. And what I felt. The next night, I drove the same stretch. I was already tense, my hands sweating just thinking about touching the steering wheel. And sure enough, as I entered the dark lane after Holbrook, my breathing returned. Stronger this time. Closer. Only now, it matched my pace. If I sped up, it became more breathless. If I slowed down, it went back to being slow. It was as if someone inside was waking up. And I began to feel something new, a slight pressure against my fingers, as if the leather were pulsing. I did a test. I took my hands off the steering wheel and let the truck drive straight for a few seconds. The breathing stopped. But as soon as I pulled over again, it started again in the same second. I decided to ask on the CB radio, to see if anyone else had experienced something like this. A trucker answered, "Are you on I-40? Between Gallup and Winslow?" I just nodded. And he said, "I've heard it. But only when I'm tired. Like the truck is breathing for me." I asked if he'd ever felt heat coming from the steering wheel. And he was silent for a while, then hung up. This scared me more than the breathing. If it were just me, I might think it was exhaustion, a hallucination. But if there are more people listening, then something lives there. Something that only wakes up at night. And only when we are tired enough to resist. The next morning, I decided to film everything again. I positioned the camera, left it rolling, and went. Halfway through the journey, the steering wheel got so hot that I had to steer with my fingertips. And for the first time, I heard a whisper next to the breathing. A short sentence. Almost incomprehensible. But it sounded like, "I want to stay." The next morning, I went to watch the footage. The video showed everything normally, until 2:47 a.m. At that point, the sound disappears and the image goes black for 3 seconds. When it comes back, you can see a mark on the leather of the steering wheel. Like a sunken-in shape. Nose, eyes, mouth, all there. And the weirdest thing, in the bottom corner of the video, a warning from the camera system appears saying, "Detected breathing pattern." I didn't even know my phone did that. And since then, every night I spend in that stretch, I feel like someone is driving with me. Today I wear gloves when I hit the road at dawn. It doesn't do much good, but it helps to deceive the sensation. Even with the protection, I still feel the heat coming from the steering wheel. A heat of a living body. And the breathing continues. Constant, present. As if it were a passenger inside the leather, waiting. Sometimes I think that, if I fell asleep at the wheel, it would take over for me. As if this thing were preparing itself. Strengthening itself. Feeding on my presence there. He had one night where I tried to ignore him completely. I didn't touch the steering wheel all the time. I drove with a thick cloth wrapped around it. And it was worse. His breathing got heavier. Angrier. He seemed frustrated. When I got to the gas station in Flagstaff and took the cloth off, the steering wheel was wet. Yes, wet. Like someone had been breathing on it for hours. Humidity, sweat, or something worse. I haven't used a cloth since. It's like he wants contact. Like he won't accept barriers. I spoke to 2 other truck drivers who had experienced something similar. One of them said that he once heard the breathing continue even after the truck was turned off. With everything stopped. Another said that he felt the steering wheel pull slightly, as if it were trying to turn on its own. I don't doubt anything anymore. This stretch of I-40 feels like there's something stuck there. Something that lives in the steering wheel. And every night, it gets a little stronger. More confident. More present. So if you're driving across the desert at 3 a.m. and you feel the heat coming from the steering wheel, don't stop. Don't talk. It was like someone exhausted, inside the leather of the steering wheel. I never paid any attention to this talk about things calling through the radio or Bluetooth. I always thought it was a system bug or a tired trucker story. But ever since I changed trucks and got this new Freightliner, some things started happening that I can't explain anymore. It all started with a call ringing in the middle of the night. It was 2:26 in the morning. I was cruising along a stretch of I-70, and my dashboard beeped as if I was receiving a call. Only the number was strange. It showed the name of my own onboard system. I thought I was hallucinating. But the sound was there. A real ring, coming through the built-in Bluetooth sound. The screen read, "Incoming call, Freightliner INT." I didn't answer, of course. I ignored it, turned off the system, kept driving. But at exactly the same time the next night, 2:26 sharp, the truck rang again. Same number. Same notification. Only this time, the call answered on its own. The sound that came out wasn't static. Not interference. It was a voice. Mine. But trembling. Desperate. The recording was short. About 8 seconds. But I could clearly hear myself saying, "Help, someone's here with me. I'm not the one driving." And then the sound of heavy breathing. I froze. I pulled over to the side of the road. I checked all the system functions, the logs, the call history. Nothing. There was no record of any call. But the sound kept echoing in my head. That was my voice. No doubt about it. Only, I didn't remember saying it. The next day, I tried to pretend it was a software glitch. I updated everything, turned off Bluetooth, and cleared the data from the control unit. But that night, when it hit 2:26, the sound came through the entire truck sound system. I didn't even have my phone paired. It just started on its own. And this time, the voice, my own, said something worse: "If I answer, he'll come in." And then it cut off. A second later, the truck's headlights blinked twice on their own. The cabin went cold. And the dashboard restarted as if I had just started the engine. On the third night, I left my phone turned off, Bluetooth disabled, and even covered the control panel with a towel, as if that could prevent anything. But at 2:26 sharp, the panel turned on by itself. And the call sound came loudly, as if it were coming from all the speakers at once. I couldn't hang up. There was no button, no menu, no way to force it to stop. And the recording was longer. My voice, again, said, "He's learning from my thoughts. I'm not the only one here anymore." Then, the sound of something banging on the inside of the cab. I even thought there was someone in the truck with me. I got up, opened everything, looked from compartment to compartment. Nothing. But when I got back to the cabin, the CB radio had its LED on, by itself, without me having turned it on. And through the sound output, I heard the same voice that came from the recordings, only, speaking directly to me. As if it were live. It whispered, "You shouldn't have listened. Now he knows." And then the system turned everything off. Dashboard, radio, air conditioning. Everything turned off at the same time for a few seconds. After that, I tried to continue my journey, but the truck started to stall every morning around that time. The ignition would lag, the brakes would take a while to respond, as if the system was fighting for control. The worst part was when the sat-nav turned on by itself and plotted a route. But it wasn't to any destination I knew. The name on the GPS simply said, "Cab Access Point." There was no city, no mileage. Just the blue line stretching out into the desert, as if it knew exactly where it wanted to take me. On the fifth night, I decided to record with an external device, hidden, without connection to the panel. I managed to capture everything. The call came in, the voice came. And this time, it said more calmly, "You were once me. Now it's your turn to take me." After that, a second silence. And then a different voice, deep, dry, said something I'll never forget, "I accept the call." Since then, the truck no longer emits the normal alerts. It only notifies, "Communication established." As if someone had actually answered. Today, every time I start my truck, the dashboard greets me with the phrase, "Good evening, operator." Even during the day. I've taken it to the dealership, I've run diagnostics, they've reset the entire system. But this greeting continues. As if it were personal. As if it knew it was me. I've tried to change trucks, but in less than a week, the same sign started appearing on the new one. It's as if it wasn't the vehicle, it was the number. The time. The call. I still have the recordings, hidden on an external hard drive that I don't connect to anything. In one of them, my voice whispers, "I can't feel my hands anymore. He's driving now." And then the sound of something breathing, not like a human, but as if the truck itself were alive. There are nights when I wake up to the sound of the horn honking by itself in the yard. And when I look at it, the dashboard shows the time 2:26, even though the Real clock shows a different time. As if he lived in another time. A friend told me to stop driving. Drop everything. And I even tried. I was away for 3 weeks. But even at home, at 2:26, my landline rang. Unknown number. When I answered, there was no sound. Just breathing. Just like in the booth. Since then, I understood that there is no point in running away. This thing chose me. Or maybe I called myself without knowing it. Like a warning. Like a reflex. So if your dashboard beeps at 2:26 in the morning, and your own truck's name appears on the screen, don't answer. Don't listen. In the recording, it was my voice. But I was asking for help. I've been driving across the eastern United States for 12 years, and I've seen a lot of strange things on the road, but nothing has left me as disconcerted as what happened near the mountains of Appalachia. It was a simple truck, a familiar route, a stretch of mountain between West Virginia and Tennessee. The kind of road full of curves, with uneven terrain and dense forest on both sides. I've driven along it dozens of times, but on this last trip, my seatbelt started acting up on its own. And it wasn't a defect, it was intentional. It all started subtly. The first long curve, going down the mountain, and I felt the belt slowly pull on my shoulder. I thought it was the brake tension, or that I had adjusted it incorrectly before exiting. But on the next curve, the belt tightened even more. Not to the point of hurting, but strong enough to lock me against the seat for about 2 seconds. When I exited the curve, it loosened on its own. As if it had done its job and that was it. But this continued on all the following curves. Always with the same pattern: left curve, the belt pulled. Right curve, it locked even more. On the fourth curve of the descent, which is tighter and has no guardrail, the belt tightened so tightly that I held my breath. And then, out of nowhere, a huge rock fell from the slope, crossing half the track. If I had gone a little faster, it would have hit the cabin. I stopped the truck, took a deep breath and noticed the belt loosening, as if it had released my body after the scare. I won't lie, my first thought was that it was luck. But then I started to think, what if it wasn't a coincidence? At the next stop, I checked the truck system, the belt tensioner, the pre-lock, everything. Nothing wrong. Everything was working normally. The only strange thing was that the truck's impact sensor had registered a light reading, without any real impact. As if something had almost happened. And then I got a chill. The belt had reacted as if it had predicted. It not only held me, but saved me for a few seconds. And from then on, I started facing every curve with fear not of the road, but of the belt. On the next stretch, I started testing. Wider curves, constant speed. On some of them, the belt didn't even move. But as soon as the curve got a little tighter or the vegetation got denser, it would tighten on its own. A dry, quick, firm tightening. No sound of a lock, no signal on the dashboard. Just that sudden tug as if someone was pulling the strap from behind my shoulder. And it wasn't just on the curves. On stretches where the GPS indicated previous accidents, the belt would lock too. It was as if it knew where things happen. Or will happen. I started checking the accident reports for that route. And it was no small feat. Several places where the seatbelt was tight had reports of rollovers, landslides, and even truck drivers who disappeared. A support station at the base of the mountain even had a mural with photos of those who didn't come back. An old man there told me that many die without braking, as if they fell asleep or were pulled along the road. And then he said something that has stuck in my head: there are things here that take care of you. But there are also things that demand it. Last night, I drove the stretch in total silence. No radio, no sound. Just me and the truck. And the seatbelt. It was like we were talking on another level. I would brake before the curves, and it wouldn't react. But when I thought about accelerating a little more, just to test the limit, the seatbelt would tighten. As if to say, not now. There was one curve in particular, near an old, cracked concrete bridge, where it braked so hard it hurt. And then, when I took the curve more slowly, I saw a huge animal crossing the road up ahead. Something that shouldn't have been there. I don't know if it was a bear, a wolf, or something else. But it was big, dark, with clear eyes. It stared at me, stopped, and then disappeared into the woods. If I had taken that curve on impulse, it might have been different. The belt loosened as soon as I passed. And at that moment I understood. That wasn't just a safety mechanism. It was as if the road itself had marked me. As if it knew I was listening, and that I needed someone who would heed the warnings. And the belt, it was the only way it could talk to me. Since then, the belt's behavior has become more precise. I don't even think of it as a defect anymore. It only reacts when something is about to happen. And the strangest thing is, it seems to react to what I feel. If I tense up before a curve, it anticipates it. If I think about forcing a stretch, it tightens more firmly. There was one night when I didn't even get off the road, I just stepped out of the truck, and the belt locked itself, twisting as if trying to pull me back in. It's not about safety anymore. It's about control. And vigilance. I told this to a mechanic I trust. He said there was nothing electronic that could justify this type of behavior. Even emergency systems don't act like that. And they couldn't do it if they were turned off. And that's when he asked, "Have you ever thought about what if this truck doesn't want you to get out?" I laughed at the time, but then I kept thinking about it. Because the truth is that every time I try to leave the mountain route, take another path, the GPS recalculates itself. And it always brings me back to the same point. As if the road wanted me there. Last week, when I was driving the last stretch, I felt my belt tighten at the beginning of a downhill stretch. No curves, no cars, no animals. Just a straight line. But even so, it locked. Moments later, a fallen tree appeared out of nowhere on the road. I managed to avoid it, but only because I was already wedged against the seat, ready for impact. It was as if it had held me steady for the swerve. As if it knew what I couldn't yet see. And when I stopped on the shoulder, I swear I felt my belt relax with a kind of sigh. So if you're driving through the mountains of Appalachia and your seatbelt feels tight for no apparent reason, don't force it. Don't fight with him. At the fourth bend, the belt tightened tightly. And seconds later, a rock fell from the mountain. I've always been good at sleeping in the cab. Anyone who's been on the road knows how it is. Pull over to a flat spot, close the curtains, turn everything off, and the world disappears for a few hours. But that stopped working after a night in an isolated area between Fort Stockton and El Paso. A dry stretch, with no cell phone coverage, not even a car headlight for miles. I pulled over after 10 hours of driving straight. The truck was turned off, the weather was mild. Everything was fine. Even the horn. A short honk. Coming from behind. But there was no car. I got up thinking it might be someone warning me of trouble. I left the cabin with the flashlight and went around. Nothing. Not a single headlight on, not a single engine sound. Just that thin desert wind and the soft sound of sand hitting the bodywork. I went back inside, locked everything up, and lay down. And less than 5 minutes later, another honk. Same intensity. Same direction. The kind of sound that isn't aggressive, but doesn't seem accidental either. And the strangest thing, no echo. The sound came dry, direct, as if it were too close. I started to feel paranoid. I went out again. I checked the CB radio, the truck's radio, even the alarm system. No records. No sign of anyone approaching. And the dirt floor was still bare of tire tracks. But when I turned on my flashlight and pointed it at the empty space behind the truck, I saw something that sent chills down my spine. The fine dust in the air was cut, as if a vehicle had just passed by. Like a trail of air, as if something had crossed the night and disappeared before materializing. The road still shook slightly beneath my feet. I left the engine running after that. I sat in the cab, eyes glued to the rearview mirror, waiting for something to appear. And around 3:15, the horn came again. But this time, closer. And the worst part, now it sounded like a familiar horn. It had that typical sound of an old truck, the kind you don't see anymore. A low, metallic tone, a little out of tune. Like it was rusty. I ran out of the cab and, I swear to God, I saw the shape of a cab passing by on the side of the road, no headlights, no parking lights, just the silhouette, and the dust. I tried to continue my journey on impulse, as if accelerating would get me away from it. But the road seemed stagnant. No matter how hard I stepped on it, the markers on the side wouldn't pass at the right speed. It felt like I was stuck on a stretch that kept repeating itself. And even with the engine screaming, the sound of the horn kept coming back. Always behind me. Always with that old, drawn-out tone. I started to think it might be some kind of auditory illusion, but the rearview mirrors started to show something strange, a dim red light, like a taillight, only without the front of the vehicle. At the next stop, a gas station in Van Horn, I spoke to another trucker who was getting gas. Without giving any details, I asked if he had ever heard a phantom horn around there. He put down the hose and said, "Did you sleep on dry land? The one near mile marker 112? I nodded. He just nodded and said, "Something honks to remind you not to stop." One time, I heard 3 honks, and on the third night, my partner disappeared. I thought he was exaggerating, until he showed me an old photo, a black, rusty Mack truck, with a horn just like the one I used to hear. The next night, no matter where I stopped, the horn found me. I tried to sleep in a well-lit truck stop, full of trucks, the sound of the TV playing inside the cabin. Still, at 2:27 in the morning, go. Severe, unique. And the worst part? No other driver reacted. It was as if I was the only one hearing it. And this time, the sound was so close that I felt the vibration in the cabin floor. When I looked in the side mirror, I saw the dust blowing away, but there was no wind. I started recording audio every morning. I picked up a variety of noises, ordinary road sounds, the hum of electricity, even night birds. But the horn? It never made it into the recording. It was like it only existed when I was there, listening to it. A friend in the technical department listened to the files and said, "The silence between 2:25 and 2:30 is so dense. Like the whole room is holding its breath." It gave me chills. Because that's exactly what I feel before the horn. Time stops, the world holds its breath, and then, it screams. This week, I tried something different. I stopped before 2 a.m., turned everything off, covered the mirrors, and put in earplugs. I wanted to isolate myself completely. But at 2:26 a.m. sharp, the horn honked inside my head. It wasn't a physical sound. It was like it had vibrated right in my chest. The kind of thing you don't hear, you just feel. And at that moment, something even more absurd, the truck's dashboard turned on by itself. The digital clock flashed 000 repeatedly. I bolted from the cab in a panic, stumbling toward the door. The road was empty, as usual. But there were fresh tire tracks in the dirt, forming a wide arc, as if someone had circled my truck. And on the front hood, written in the dust, a single word, "Wake up." Since then, I don't even try to sleep in the cab anymore. I take short stops, naps with my eyes open. The sound keeps coming, every morning, without fail. Always behind me. Always alone. One morning I walked to the side of the road with my flashlight on, determined to face whatever it was. I pointed the light straight into nothingness, and I swear I saw the lines of asphalt rippling, as if something invisible were crossing them. And when I turned around, the tire tracks were there again. Fresh. Wet, as if a truck had just passed by, but there was no noise. No engine. No wind. Just the feeling that something ancient was still waiting for me to fall asleep. So if you're driving through the dry, straight parts of Texas, and you hear a single, isolated horn at 2 a.m., don't stop. Don't look in the mirrors. There were no headlights. But the flying dust showed tires passing by.